In a distant time, when the kingdoms of Israel and Judah were ruled by kings who often strayed from the Lord's ways, the land was filled with challenges and uncertainties. The people cried out for signs of hope, while corruption and idolatry threatened true faith. Amidst this tumultuous scene, one man stood out for his unwavering devotion to God, Elisha. He had been chosen as the successor to the great prophet Elijah, and his life was marked by miracles and teachings that inspired and guided those who still believed. Elijah, the prophet of fire, was about to experience one of the most extraordinary moments of his life. He knew that his time on earth was drawing to a close, and anxiety and anticipation permeated his emotions. The idea of leaving his disciples and the mission entrusted to him was a heavy burden. But at the same time, there was a sense of peace in knowing that a new chapter would open for Elisha. The setting was one of majestic mountains and deep valleys, where sunlight filtered through the clouds, creating an almost heavenly atmosphere. The people around felt a mixture of reverence and curiosity, knowing that something grand was about to happen. As he walked, Elisha followed in the footsteps of his mentor, feeling both the pressure of responsibility and a deep admiration for the one who had taught him to hear the voice of God. The young prophet was determined not to let Elijah leave without his heart being prepared. He knew that the blessing he wished to ask for, the double portion of Elijah's spirit, was not a simple request, but an acknowledgement of the greatness of the mission that awaited him. The expectation weighed upon him like a thundercloud, and the outcome of this journey could change not only his life, but also the fate of the people. However, there was something more at stake. The prophets who lived in the school of prophets were aware of Elijah's imminent departure. They watched from afar, intrigued by the relationship between the master and his disciple. What would happen to them without Elijah's leadership? Would they be able to stand firm in their faith? The feeling of loss and loneliness hovered over them as they waited anxiously for a miracle that could reaffirm God's presence in their lives. Amidst this tension, the scene unfolded, and the sky began to change. Dark clouds formed, and a strong wind blew, as if nature itself were preparing to witness the event that would change everything. Emotions intensified. Elisha's despair mixed with the hope that at the end of that journey, he could be worthy of inheriting Elijah's spirit. Elijah, with his piercing gaze, turned to Elisha and, in a moment of deep connection, asked, "What do you want me to do for you before I am taken?" The words echoed in the air, laden with meaning and expectation. Elisha, with a racing heart, knew this was his chance, and that what he asked for could define not only his future, but the future of an entire nation. The atmosphere was charged with tension, and every character was on the brink of the unknown. What would happen next? The answers were about to be revealed, and the narrative of faith, courage, and transition was about to reach a climax that would echo through generations. The sun began to set, painting the sky in golden and rosy hues, as Elisha and Elijah walked together through the valley. Elisha felt a mixture of admiration and anxiety. As he looked at his mentor, he saw not only a man of God, but a spiritual father who had guided him through life's storms. However, the shadow of Elijah's imminent departure loomed over him like a premonition that prevented him from fully enjoying that moment. "Why are you so troubled, my young one?" Elijah asked, his voice soft but firm. "You must know that God's work is not limited to one man. He will always raise up others to continue his ways." Elisha hesitated before replying, "I know, Elijah, but the thought of being without you is terrifying. You are my anchor in times of doubt. How can I bear the weight of responsibility without your counsel?" Elijah stopped and looked into his disciple's eyes. "True strength comes from within, Elisha. You were molded by God for this moment. You are not just inheriting a mantle, you are receiving a mission. Remember the lessons you have learned. When you feel lost, seek God in prayer. He will always answer." These words echoed in Elisha's mind, but the insecurity still plagued him. He knew the path ahead would not be easy. The people of Israel were divided, and the influences of Baal and other idolatries were stronger than ever. Elisha remembered his visits to villages where people turned away from true worship, indulging in practices that dishonored the Lord. He feared that, without Elijah, the people's faith would dissipate even further. As they continued to walk, a group of young prophets approached. They were known for their devotion, but also for their uncertainty about the future. One of them, named Obadiah, addressed Elisha with a worried expression. "Prophet Elisha," Obadiah began, "we have heard rumors that Elijah will be taken up to heaven. What will become of us? Are we ready to continue the fight without him?" Elisha noticed the unease on the faces of the young people. "We must stand firm in the faith. God will not abandon us. He will always have a plan for those who seek him with all their hearts. We need to prepare for what is to come, but this requires courage and unity among us." "What if we fail?" asked a young woman named Miriam, her eyes shining with anxiety. "How can we face the challenges without Elijah's leadership?" Elisha looked at them, realizing that the fears he felt were shared. "Fear can paralyze us, but faith propels us. Remember that the Lord is with us. We must pray, unite, and seek his wisdom. Only then can we face the darkness that approaches." Meanwhile, Elijah watched the interaction, feeling proud of his disciple. He knew that Elisha had grown more than he could have imagined, but the weight of responsibility still oppressed him. It was his last moment to guide, and he wanted Elisha to be ready for the battle that awaited him. The walk continued, and the sky began to darken, signaling an imminent change. Clouds gathered, and a strong wind blew, as if foreshadowing the storm that was approaching. Elisha felt his heart quicken, and the tension in the atmosphere intensified. He knew that the moment of his question was approaching, but uncertainty enveloped him. Upon reaching a high place where the mountains met the sky, Elijah stopped and turned to Elisha. "We are nearing the end of our journey," he said, with a voice that conveyed both sadness and hope. "What do you desire from me?" Elisha took a deep breath, his emotions at the surface. "I want a double portion of your spirit," he stated, with a firmness he did not feel. "I want to be able to guide the people of Israel back to the Lord's way, as you have done." Elisha's words came out like a cry from the depths of his soul. He knew that this was not just a selfish desire for power, but a call to serve. The experiences he had lived through prepared him for this responsibility, but doubt still accompanied him. Elijah smiled, recognizing the sincerity and determination in his disciple. "You have asked for something difficult," he replied, "but if you see me when I am taken, it will be granted to you." The young prophets who had followed the two in silence now watched intently, absorbing every word. The tension became palpable, and the challenges ahead seemed darker than ever. Each of them, in their hearts, knew that they were about to enter a new era, and the question that echoed in their minds was, would they be ready for what was to come? The sky gradually darkened, and the pressure in the air increased, as if the universe itself were holding its breath. Elisha observed the faces of the young prophets, now pale and anxious, and felt his heart race. He knew that the responsibility he was about to take on was immense, and doubt began to invade his mind like a subtle poison. "Elisha!" A familiar voice interrupted his thoughts. It was Obadiah who approached, his gaze full of concern. "We are hearing rumors about an imminent confrontation with the prophets of Baal. If we don't act, the faith we have may be destroyed." The tension grew, and Elisha realized that the situation was beyond what he had imagined. He had always known that idolatry was a threat, but now it was becoming a tangible force, an adversary to be faced. "We need to unite," Elisha responded. But the insecurity in his voice betrayed his determination. "If they unite against us, what can we do?" The fear that had previously hidden beneath the surface now bubbled up, and Elisha found himself reflecting on his decisions. He didn't just want to be a leader, he wanted to be a good leader. The pressure to prove his worth and protect those who depended on him seemed unbearable. The weight of responsibility began to become a burden, and he wondered if he could bear it. Meanwhile, Elijah watched with growing concern. Elisha's countenance, which had previously reflected determination, now revealed a shadow of doubt. He knew that the spiritual battle approaching was not only against the prophets of Baal, but also against the uncertainties that haunted his disciples' heart. "Elisha," Elijah called, "do not forget the strength that is within you. Every choice you make shapes not only your destiny, but also the destiny of those around you." Elijah's voice resonated in his mind, but the pain of uncertainty was real and tangible. "What if I fail?" Elisha murmured, more to himself than to Elijah. "What if, in the decisive moment, I don't have the courage I need?" The young prophets listened to the conversation, each immersed in their own dilemmas. Miriam, the young woman he had spoken to before, stepped forward. "Elisha, we all feel the weight of responsibility, but we can't let fear consume us. We need to believe in each other and in the direction God has given us." The word fear echoed in his mind, and Elisha realized that the hesitation he felt was not only about the future, but also about his own identity. Was he truly ready to lead? What did it mean to be a prophet, a leader? He wanted to be like Elijah, but at the same time, he feared not being up to the task. Night fell, and the wind began to whistle as if it wanted to carry away his concerns. Elisha felt that he needed to break free from the spiral of doubts and insecurities. "We must prepare for what is to come," he declared with more firmness, trying to reclaim the courage he felt dissipating. "Let's unite in prayer and seek God's wisdom. We need a plan." The young prophets nodded, and determination began to replace uncertainty. But even so, a shadow of conflict hovered over them. What would happen if the plan failed? What if the forces of Baal were more powerful than they expected? As the group gathered, Elisha realized that the tension didn't just come from outside. He was struggling with his own uncertainties, and as much as he wanted to be a beacon of hope, the darkness crept into his soul. The responsibility he wanted to embrace now seemed like an overwhelming burden. He wondered if he could be the anchor that Elijah had been for him. The young people now in a circle began to pray aloud, their voices intertwining in a plea for strength and courage. Elisha closed his eyes, seeking the connection with God that had always guided him. But as the words of prayer filled the air, he felt the internal struggle intensify. He wanted to believe in God's promises, but doubt still haunted him. Night advanced, and uncertainty became a constant in his heart. The voices rose, and Elisha found himself in a conflict between hope and fear, between the desire to lead and the fear of failure. He knew that the journey ahead would be fraught with challenges, but at the same time, he realized that this was the opportunity he had always desired, a call to rise up and be the change he so longed for. With a final sigh, he decided that he would not allow fear to govern his actions. It was time to face what was to come, and he would commit to doing so, not only for himself, but for all those who counted on him. The clamor of voices around me echoed like a thunderous melody, a symphony of hope and despair. I closed my eyes and let the words of prayer seep into my being. However, behind this facade of unity, the storm of uncertainty raged in my mind. The responsibility I wanted to shoulder felt like a burden, and doubt grew like a shadow over me. What if I fail? This question haunted my thoughts, like a distant echo that grew louder and louder. When I finally opened my eyes, the atmosphere was charged, and the sky, which had previously been just a backdrop, now seemed like a stage for what was to come. The wind whistled, carrying with it the portent of an imminent battle. I looked at the faces of the young prophets, each of them carrying their own anxieties, and understood that I was not alone in this struggle. The weight of expectation did not fall only upon me, but upon all of us. This realization was a relief, but at the same time, it intensified the pressure I felt. "We need to act," I declared, trying to inject a dose of courage into my voice. "If the prophets of Baal are organizing, we must prepare ourselves as well. Let's divide into groups and seek information. We need to find out how many they are and what their tactics are." The young people nodded, and determination began to shine in their eyes. The idea of action, of doing something instead of just waiting, calmed my mind a little. However, a new doubt arose. Was I truly prepared to lead this team in such an intense conflict? As the plan took shape, my feelings became an internal battlefield. I wanted to be the leader they needed. But what if I wasn't up to the task? Obadiah, who had remained at my side, interrupted my thoughts. "Elisha, you are the chosen one for this moment. Remember what Elijah taught you. Strength does not come only from us, but from the faith we have in God and in ourselves." His words echoed in me, but insecurity was still deeply rooted. How could I, a common man, confront the prophets of Baal, who were known for their powers and their tricks? The image of Elijah, strong and determined, appeared in my mind, and I wondered if I could reflect a little of that strength. The internal struggle intensified, and I knew that to move forward, I needed to overcome these fears. As the young prophets scattered to organize the search for information, I found myself alone for a moment. The sky darkened more and more, and the pressure in the air seemed almost palpable. I looked towards the horizon, where menacing clouds were gathering. It was as if the world was in suspense, awaiting the outcome of our choice. Part of me wanted to run, to escape responsibility, but another part knew I couldn't. It was time to act. I decided that, first and foremost, I needed to visit the altar that Elijah had built, a sacred place where the presence of God was tangible. The way there was familiar, but every step I took seemed like a challenge. I needed clarity, a sign to show me that I was on the right path. Upon arriving, I placed my hands on the cold stone of the altar and closed my eyes again. "Lord, guide me. Give me courage and wisdom. May I be a beacon of light in this moment of darkness." I felt a wave of heat wash over my body, and a serenity began to replace the anxiety. It was as if the voice of God echoed in my heart, reminding me that I was not alone. The connection I had always sought was there, and the responsibility I carried could be transformed into strength. With renewed determination, I returned to the group. They were already gathered, discussing what they had discovered. Looking at them, I realized that confidence was beginning to form. Each one brought their courage, and together we were stronger. "We need to be strategic," I began, feeling the adrenaline pumping through my veins. "We will use the night to infiltrate and obtain valuable information. Based on what we find, we can develop a plan for the confrontation." The idea of action brought a new spirit to the group, and the voices became firmer. But even as I spoke, my heart still beat fast, and doubt lingered like a lurking shadow. The climax was approaching, and I knew that every decision we made now could change the fate of us all. The pressure was mounting, and conflicting emotions were becoming a whirlwind within me. The battle would not only be against the prophets of Baal, but also against my own uncertainties. I was about to face a test that would define not only my future, but that of all who depended on me. And despite the fear that still dwelled in my heart, the flame of determination began to shine brightly. It was time to confront the darkness, and I was determined to do it with all the courage I could muster. Night fell like a dark cloak over the land, and the full moon illuminated the path in a supernatural way. The group was silent, each one absorbing the tension that permeated the air. The plan was laid out, and the adrenaline surged through my veins as we moved towards the camp of the prophets of Baal. Fear was still present, but now it was a controlled flame, a motivation that propelled me. Darkness seemed to entwine with our steps as we approached the place where the prophets gathered, laughing and making plans. I could hear their voices, full of assurance and arrogance, and this only fueled my determination. I looked at the faces of my companions and saw a mixture of fear and bravery. We were a small army, but we were united by a greater purpose. When we reached the perimeter of the camp, I signaled for us to split into smaller groups. Each of us had a task: listen, observe, and gather information. As I moved towards the central bonfire where most of the prophets were gathered, my heart raced. The tension in the air was palpable, and the expectation of an imminent confrontation loomed like a dark cloud. I hid behind a tree, observing the scene. The prophets of Baal, with their elaborate robes, seemed self-assured, as if they had already won the battle before it even began. But as I looked at them, I realized something. Their confidence was superficial, based on deceitful practices that could not stand up to true strength. That was what I needed to remember. Truth was our greatest ally. When one of the prophets began to exalt himself, invoking Baal with screams and frenzied dances, I felt it was time to act. I stood up, my body vibrating with the energy of determination. What I was about to do was not only a battle against them, but a test of my faith. I walked towards the bonfire, feeling the eyes turn towards me. "Prophets of Baal," my voice echoed, firm and resonant, despite the storm of emotions within me. Why cry out to a God who does not answer? Today, I challenge you to prove that your practices are more powerful than faith in a true God. Silence fell over the camp, and a wave of laughter followed. They did not expect me, a common man, to challenge them, but I did not let myself be intimidated. I felt a strength welling up from within me, and the words of Obadiah echoed in my mind. Strength does not come only from us, but from the faith we have in God. The prophets began to murmur among themselves, and one of them, a large and imposing man, strode towards me. "Do you dare challenge Baal? Prepare to suffer the consequences." His arrogance was palpable, but I was ready. The heat of battle burned within me, and the presence of God enveloped me like a cloak. "If Baal is truly a god, let him answer with fire," I shouted, challenging him. "But if the Lord is God, let him show his glory now." The challenge was launched, and I knew that the fate of us all depended on this moment. As the prophets of Baal prepared, I began to pray silently, asking for strength and clarity. They began to dance and cut themselves, calling out to their deity, but the response was a deathly silence. Time seemed to drag on, and the tension mounted. Their laughter turned to despair as they became increasingly frenzied, and I just watched, feeling the certainty growing within me. Finally, it was my turn. "Now, it's time to prove the truth," I said, and raised my hands. "Lord, God of Abraham, of Isaac, and of Israel, let it be known today that you are God." The atmosphere became electric, and as my prayer ascended to heaven, a breeze began to blow. The sky, which had been clear before, now became menacing. Lightning cut through the sky, and a thunderous clap echoed in the distance. The prophets of Baal stopped, their eyes turning towards me, now filled with fear. And then, as if heaven itself had answered my call, a flame descended, consuming the altar and everything around it. The light illuminated the night, and the truth was revealed, the strength I had feared so much. The responsibility that seemed like a burden now transformed into a testament of faith. The prophets of Baal fell to their knees, terrified by the manifestation of divine power. The battle had been won, but I knew that the consequences of the struggle were not over. The fight for faith and truth would continue, but at that moment, I had found a greater purpose within me. The echo of victory still resonated in the air, but I knew that what was to come would require more courage, more faith, and more unity. The journey was just beginning, and although the climax of the struggle had been resolved, its true depth and the lessons to be learned were still before me. The flame that descended from heaven was not just a sign of victory, it was a redefinition of all that we knew. As the prophets of Baal fell to their knees, the heat of the fire illuminated our faces, and the adrenaline that had once pulsed through my veins now transformed into a wave of relief and disbelief. I couldn't look away from the consumed altar, from the power of God manifested before us. That was a victory that would echo through generations, but the weight of responsibility still hung over me. Murmurs of amazement spread like wildfire. My companions, who had been nervous and fearful until then, now exchanged glances of astonishment and joy. The atmosphere of tension began to dissipate, and a new energy formed among us. Some began to shout, extolling the strength of the Lord, while others approached me, gratitude in their eyes. "You did it," said one of them, a young man who had always shown himself to be skeptical. There was a new glimmer in his eyes, a renewed belief that had previously seemed distant. But as the celebration began, a chill ran down my spine, alerting me to the consequences that would come. Victory had a price, and I knew that what we had just done would not go unanswered. The prophets of Baal, even defeated, were still many and influential, and their fury could turn against us. The night, illuminated by the flame, now seemed more menacing, and the shadow of the events that would unfold next was inevitable. The prophets, in their humiliation, began to disperse, but not before casting angry glances in our direction. The big man who had threatened me before, now, trembled. In his gaze, I saw the mixture of fear and rage, as if he were seeking a way to avenge the defeat. With a sudden gesture, he shouted orders, summoning the others to prepare for a counterattack. The words of Obadiah echoed again in my mind. The struggle is not limited to a single encounter. It is a continuous battle for truth. "We need to move quickly," I said, taking the lead and guiding the others. Looking back, I saw the faces of my companions, now marked by determination. The confidence I had felt when facing the prophets began to spread, and I realized that this was what they needed: leadership, an example to follow. As we moved away from the camp, the reality of what we had done began to settle in. The power we had just witnessed brought with it a new responsibility. Each of us had a role to play in what was yet to come. The faith that united us was now a force that we needed to channel into action. On the way back, the group discussed fervently about what would happen next. "We must gather more people, alert the nearby villages," said one of the elders, his voice firm. He was right. The battle was not only mine, but ours. We needed to unite, strengthen our faith, and prepare ourselves for what was to come. The echo of victory still resonated, but the shadow of the enemy was approaching. I remembered the words I had spoken before the prophets of Baal. The truth would always prevail, but that would require more than just a moment of bravery. Looking at the faces around me, I realized that we were all changed. Those who had doubted now believed, and those who were afraid were ready to fight. The unity we had created in the face of adversity was now a beacon of hope. As the full moon slowly moved across the sky, a new understanding began to form within me. What seemed to be a battle against the prophets of Baal was also a struggle against the doubts and fears that dwelled in our own hearts. And while we had won a battle, the war for faith and truth was still ahead of us. The consequences of our actions, however, were clear. We were ready to face whatever came, together. The journey ahead promised to be challenging, but now, for the first time, I was sure we were not alone. As we moved away from the camp, a cloud of tension and expectation hung over us. We knew that the victory over the prophets of Baal was not the end, but only the beginning of a greater battle. The echo of the flame that consumed the altar still reverberated in my mind, and the weight of the responsibility we carried was palpable. That night, as we gathered around a campfire, each one shared their reflections on what had happened. No one doubted the presence and power of God anymore. The young skeptic who had hesitated before now spoke with fervor, his voice full of passion. "We must go to Jezebel. She needs to know that the Lord is God," he exclaimed. The fervor was growing among us, but I knew we also needed to be prudent. Knowing that the fury of the defeated prophets would not dissipate easily, I began to plan our next action. The urgency of the situation weighed on me, but at the same time, I felt renewed confidence. God had manifested himself, and I knew he would continue to guide us, so we decided it was time to gather the people and remind them of the power of our God. However, what happened next was beyond what I could imagine. Jezebel, furious and determined to avenge the fall of her prophets, sent a message of death. "May the gods do this to me, and much more, if tomorrow at this time I do not do to you as I did to them." This threat struck me like lightning. The courage that had driven me to confront the prophets now seemed to evaporate in the face of that woman's wrath. I fled into the desert, exhausted and consumed by fear. Loneliness and disillusionment enveloped me like a dense fog. In a moment of despair, I cried out to God, questioning whether it had been worth it. What more can I do? I am alone. The answer, however, did not come in the way I expected. God, in his mercy, did not abandon me. He sent an angel to comfort and nourish me. The divine presence was felt, and I realized that even in my weakness, he was by my side. The story continued, and divine justice manifested itself in the midst of the crisis. God not only strengthened me, but also caused the people to unite around the truth. The final outcome was a call to collective action, a mobilization of the people to follow the will of God. As the Lord had said, the prophets of Baal were eliminated, and idolatry began to lose its power over the hearts of the people. Reflecting on all this, I realized that the victory was not merely over the prophets, but over the doubts and fears that dwelled in each of us. The ongoing struggle for faith demanded not only courage, but also a genuine commitment to seeking truth and justice. What we learned was that God's victories are not limited to a single event, but are an invitation to a life of continuous faith. The narrator of this story reflects on the importance of God's response to adversity. Divine intervention was not just a display of power, but a reminder that even in our weakness, we are sustained and guided by his hand. The moral lesson is clear. True victory comes from faith and the unity of the people in pursuit of what is right. God not only calls us to fight, but equips us with everything we need to persevere. The justice that followed our battle against idolatry is a testament to the fact that when we unite our voices and hearts, we can change the course of history. The fight for truth continues, but with the assurance that we are never alone. As I sat in the shade of a desert tree, the gentle breeze caressing my face, memories of the battle against the prophets of Baal still danced in my mind. The loneliness that had consumed me before was now a sacred space of reflection. The experience taught me that faith is not a straight line, but a journey filled with highs and lows. In moments of triumph, like the one when God answered with fire, our faith shines brightly. But in times of despair, when threats and fear surround us, it's common to feel that we are alone, lost in a sea of doubt. The truth I learned is that even when we feel weak and helpless, God never abandons us. The intervention of the angel, the food I received, was not just a physical need but spiritual sustenance. God cares for us in every aspect of life. He reveals himself in our weaknesses, offering not just strength, but a reminder of his constant presence. The battle against idolatry and the forces that draw us away from him is not only fought in times of grandeur, but also in our most vulnerable moments. Through my struggle, I realized that the true challenge of faith lies in standing firm even when the storm intensifies. Therefore, the message I want to share is that each of us, regardless of our circumstances, is called to trust in God, to unite our voices in pursuit of truth, and to act with courage. Faith is not an isolated act, but a collective commitment. When we come together, as we did after the victory over the prophets, we are able to bring about significant changes in our world. Every small action in the name of justice and truth is a step in the right direction. We must be the light in the midst of darkness, reflecting the presence of God in our lives. Observing the transformation that occurred among the people, it is clear that the story doesn't end with the victory over Baal, but extends into the daily lives of each individual. The moral of the story is clear. True strength comes from unity and a willingness to fight for what is right, even when adversity seems insurmountable. When we face challenges that threaten our faith, it is crucial to remember that we need God and each other. The spiritual lesson that emerges is that the life of faith is not a path free of difficulties, but a continuous invitation to trust, obey, and seek God's presence. Each of us is called to face our own battles, but never alone. By uniting in prayer and action, we can transform our fears into courage and our weakness into strength. Justice and truth are not just ideals to be pursued, but the essence of the life that God invites us to live. Therefore, may we always remember that even in the darkest hours, the light of God shines in us and through us, and together we can change the course of our history.